Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the RIOT Science Club. Thank you for joining us today. Just a few words of introduction before we get started. So I'm just going to share my desktop as well so you can see that. So you've got many great upcoming talks, and one that I really wanted to highlight for you is this Introduction to Resting State Fmri Analysis workshop, which will be run by our, I guess I should say many times returning speaker, Dr. Matt Wall. So to learn a little bit more about the workshop and all of our other talks, do visit our website, follow us on Twitter, and we'll pop the links to all of those things in the Q&A box so you can navigate them easily. In the Q&A box, as usual, you'll be able to put your questions in. You can do that throughout the talk and just make sure that you make use of the upvote button to show us the questions that you are particularly interested in. And I will go through them with the speaker at the end of the presentation. So on to our talk today. So our speaker today is Dr. Sagar Jilka. Dr. Jilka is the coordinator for the Patient and Carer Involvement and Engagement team within the NIHR Maudsley Biomedical Research Centre at King's College London. Sagar has previous experience of research and applied science in both academia and industry, and his current work focuses on facilitating service user-led projects, and that's why he's here with us today. So Sagar will tell us a little bit more about how we can better engage the public and service users in the research process. So take it away, Sagar.
Thanks, Livia. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to share. I'm going to go into presentation mode. You can still hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, thanks so much, Livia. Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Sagar Jilka. I'm the, as Olivia said, the Maudsley Biomedical Research Centre's PPI coordinator, patient and public involvement coordinator. And you might have heard that term PPI or PPE or service user involvement or various kind of forms of this. And hopefully after today, you might be kind of a bit confused or miffed by it, but hopefully after today we'll, understand a bit more about, what that means, a bit of background to it. I'll also give some advice on how you as a researcher can involve service users and carers also. And then I'll give some examples, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the barriers to involvement. So just to start off with, on my title side it says the Patient and Care Involvement and Engagement Theme Coordinator. I don't know if you saw, but then I also said the Patient Public Involvement Coordinator. So there's a lot of jargon. You might have heard various other terms like user-led research, user involvement in research, PPI, PPE, as I just said. Some people even think, sometimes use participation or carer participation. So there's lots of kind of different terminology. So just to kind of set the precedent, when we're talking about involvement, we're not talking about taking part in research. The fact that a patient has come in and taken part in your research study, that's not kind of involving patients. And when we're talking about public engagement, we're not talking about, well, actually, also when you're talking about public involvement, we're not talking about, if you have a exhibition at the, Barbican Science Festival or Royal Society Summer Fair or something like that, and you have a stand or something like that, and you're engaging the public. That's also not involvement. It's a type of engagement, but it's not actually involving patients and carers and the public into your research. So I like to use these examples a lot by NIHR, which is involvement is a means of improving research, not an end in itself. So it's, you have to kind of think of involvement as you would, any other part of the research process, like, doing a power analysis or some, involving statisticians or, some other sort of experts. And this definition by involve is one I quite like as well, which is research carried out with or by members of the public rather than to, about, or for them. So it's, it's actually not, we're not doing something passively and that they're going to benefit from. Actually, we're going to involve them so we understand what they want and how they can kind of be instrumental in the research process. So these are various kind of activities that we as researchers do. So getting patient or service users advice on your research information sheet. Do you, for example, think that is a form of involvement? Or how about presenting your work at an academic conference or providing your study participants with your study results? You probably also talk about your work at public engagement events. You obviously recruit patients and members of the public to take part in your study. You may consult with patients on your study idea or co-author a paper with a patient or service user representative. You might just put an advert out on Twitter or social media to recruit. But not all of these is a form of involvement, and I just want to kind of highlight that there's so many different kind of activities we do as researchers, but there's not everything is defined as involvement. So in these examples, certainly getting advice from service users on your information sheets, your consent forms, your lay summaries, stuff that is patient facing, that is a form of involvement, because that essentially will help shape your research. Especially things like consulting patients or carers or service users on your research idea, and particularly co-authoring a paper where they have active input in the way the public will read and see your research. So based on that, there's various levels of involvement. So at the bottom of this kind of upside down pyramid, there's nothing, and as you go up, you're increasing the levels of involvement to a level where you're thinking about a partnership where a patient or a group of patients or carers, whoever it is, they are essentially making decisions with you, alongside you, or essentially they have full control of the study. And I'll just kind of explain a little bit more about what I mean by the partnership level. So in our BRC we have several grants where service users are joint grant holders or co-applicants. A lot of our research is based on the priorities that service users have told us. So our funding comes, as I mentioned, from the Maudsley Biomedical Research Centre, and so the theme lead is Till Wykes. You might know Professor Wykes, and she did a lot of work before we submitted the grant to understand, well, actually, what do services and carers want from our BRC? What do they want us to study? And what is important to them, and all that information then went into the grant application. So that kind of level of partnership where we're not just doing science that we're interested in, we're doing science that's going to be meaningful for patients and carers. Also the development of information sheets or the research materials, employing researchers who have experience of using mental health services. And there's we have a department called the Service User Research Enterprise, SURE, which where you have expert by experience, amazing researchers who really understand the mental health system, because they've gone through it. So it's very informed, and then these researchers are there basically going out, they're collecting data from research participants, analysing that data. So they're running the focus groups, they're analysing that data, so they have in-depth understanding about what's going on. So that's what we're talking about, kind of the partnership level. But having said that, there's a level of appropriate involvement, and often some of you might have seen these slides before because I've given similar talks in other ways. But you might be doing a study where you're generating themes for a patient satisfaction questionnaire. You might be doing some study in mice, or you might be developing a new CBT online therapy for psychosis kind of thing. And depending on what you're doing, there needs to be appropriate level of involvement. So it can't be tokenistic, and I'll come on to the issue of tokenism a bit later on. So coming on to why bother with involvement? Why is it important? And over time, what we're seeing is progressively more work and more data showing that, well, without involving service users and the public, a lot of biomedical research is wasted, and that gap is I guess a little bit increasing, because nowadays we have a gap between kind of clinical scientists and non-clinical researchers. You see funders often putting out calls for clinical fellowships versus non-clinical fellowships, and so there's this gap between the clinical scientists and then the patient and non-clinical researchers, and then the patients who need those discoveries. And so often what happens is a non-clinical researcher may have a promising discovery, but then it doesn't quite make it through to the clinical group and then to the patients or into the kind of clinical world, basically. And sometimes it's the case where promising beginnings just don't end up in benefits because no one has even checked if it's something that service users or patients want. So it's really important that what you're doing is translational, and that's essentially the premise of biomedical research centres. What NIHR have set up these huge BRCs, and actually with all research, And another reason why, you know, sometimes I reluctant to put this in here because it might appear tokenistic, but it's also important to know. But another reason why involvement and PPI is really important is because increasingly funders want to know that you're engaged and want to know that patients are involved in your research. And I mean, I think this is quite old one because I put some of these slides I put together some time ago, but it still stands. This is a NIHR funding call, and you can see in section 5 here it asks for it says here it's helpful to involve patients and carers, members of the public, in developing a plain English summary. And then again here, content when writing your summary, consider the following information of appropriate patient and public involvement. So it's being thought about as, you know, as you would the background of your study or the design or the methods of it. Here, section 6, your research plan. NIHR expects appropriate involvement of patients and the public. So, you know, it's you know, it's making you kind of engage with this in the PPI world here. It's in a section of it, it's saying you need to write a section on public involvement. So it's, you know, it's throughout the applications, and other funders are increasingly doing the same basically. So it's not just important because it's important to make sure your research is translational. It's, you know, it's actually important because, you know, it's something that you're going to have to do at some stage as well. So based on that, what I thought I'd do is a bit of practical help. So, you know, where to go for help. And then I'll talk a little bit about kind of some examples and for example, how I've developed some studies where I've involved service users here. So internationally, there's various networks like the Gamian network, or there's virtual networks. You can, you know, Google these, and I'm sure you'll find lots of kind of you'll find the website and lots of kind of forums talking about it. There's lots of national services. So there's the NIHR Involve website, which has tons of resources, and that all our kind of PPI contributors, PPI people contribute to the website and their and the material that's on that website. There's the Survivor User Network, and there's tons of charities as well. There's increasing more charities doing PPI work, like locally there's, well, nationally there's the Pin Foundation, but Pin Foundation also do a lot of work with us. But I thought, because I'm at the Maudsley BRC, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about what we offer, you know, at the Maudsley BRC, and that's open to other researchers as well. You know, we have several advisory groups that do a variety of different type of things. So for example, we have something called the SUAG, which is a group of service users who meet regularly, I think every kind of, you know, 4 to 6 weeks, and they provide feedback to researchers on anything in terms of, you know, their research, so the design, the general kind of ethics, application, the lay summaries, jargon, general ideas, support about recruitment ideas, and our YPAG, which is a young person's mental health advisory group, does something similar. So that, you know, the YPAG is a group of 16 to 26-year-olds, group of young people who have, again, all used mental health services, experienced poor mental health or mental health problems, and want to really shape research. A group that have really good ideas. It's a group that support researchers. We meet on a Saturday, and again, this is something I'll talk about later on, which is about, you know, finding convenient times and stuff like that. So, you know, with the 16 to 26-year-old group, I have a YPAG. This group, they're at university, they're at college, you know, on a Monday to Friday, and so you know, we had to pick a time that's you know, suitable for people. So once every 6 weeks, we meet in central London in Euston, and we hire out a venue in Euston, and researchers come there and talk to the group. And you know, we've sort of negotiated the payment with these young people, you know, so that, you know, because otherwise these young people are at university, and on Saturdays they're working a part-time job in Tesco or something like that. And so, you know, but we want to retain their specialist knowledge, so, you know, we pay them from our BRC budget, and so that it's a group of experts by experience providing advice, and from a research perspective, it's completely free. So, you know, you're more than welcome to kind of come and talk to these these groups. We have something called the Fasta Service, something that's a virtual service from a researcher. So, you know, from your perspective as a researcher, you know, you'd send us your documentation, your patient-facing documents. So this is your information sheets, consent forms, lay summaries, things that you're designing that a potential participant will see. So it might be a post that you're thinking of putting up, or a flyer, or, you know, all this sort of stuff. And we would get that reviewed by a group of service users and carers. And they'll pick up things, they'll comment on things like jargon, or this sentence doesn't make sense, but actually what I'm interested in is I still don't know actually what this person wants to do, like what will be required of me, and they'll help shape kind of your information sheets and the stuff that, you know, the stuff that your rec, you know, the research ethics committee will see. So there's various things that we do at the Maudsley BRC, you know, and there's several other groups. I mentioned the Shaw before, you know, they're expert researchers, you know, very easy to kind of contact them, set up collaborations and get support, you know, in various other ways. And there's lots of other groups, like we have the malady group, which is a group of which is to do with mental health in older adults. So it's for dementia. So, you know, I've got a study where I'm collaborating with Malady personally as part of one of my projects, and a great group, you know, a group of carers. And they're advising me on things like stigma, things on like trivialization in dementia. You know, so from my perspective, I'm getting the wording, the language correct. And as I said, it's all kind of free for a researcher, from your researcher's perspective. So it's all this information is on the Maudsley BRC website. So if anybody's interested, just, you know, Google Maudsley BRC PPI, you know, something along those lines, and you'll see lots of support for researchers, and please be in touch. So I want to spend more time actually just practically talking about some examples of studies that I'm running, or at least been involved in. So this is a study that I'm running that I set up when I first started in this role, and based on kind of my own interests and through conversations with our YPAG, this young person's mental health advisory group that I spoke about just now. And the study is all about trying to identify schizophrenia stigma on social media, but using machine learning. So there's a few things going on here that I need a little bit of support with. And so, you know, I had this idea. I realized that there's lots of kind of stigma online, basically. You know, I don't know, some of you might have seen this mental patient fancy dress costume on eBay or Amazon or something like that, you know, a few years ago. I think thankfully got taken down. But this kind of this kind of stuff is, you know, certainly not uncommon online. And then the focus on social media was because, you know, as things are evolving, as life is evolving, what we're able to do is look at sort of lots of people's views, whereas previously, you know, it'd essentially be an editor writing headlines like this, and the narrative would be shaped by one person. But actually now what we're interested in is, you know, a lot of people, basically. So when we're looking at social media, we're looking at a larger audience and the narrative around them. So I spoke to the young person's mental health advisory groups, you know, sat, you know, around. We had, it's very, you know, you can make it quite informal, so you sit around a table, you know, have a cup of coffee with them, and we just sort of spoke to them. I spoke to them about the idea, asked them to help me understand mental health stigma on social media, and we put a plan together about this study. You know, we said, okay, I said, this is my vision, this is what I want to do. I want to identify schizophrenia stigma on Twitter. This is my plan. But I need help in these these things, because, you know, what are your suggestions in terms of understanding stigma? Can you help identify what kind of features there are in tweets? And I'll explain this a little bit more in a minute. And so we put this kind of 5-step plan together. You know, they will help at various steps of the study. And it was you know, like a true collaboration, where in the first step, you know, we sat around the table, we said, okay, well, what do we understand by stigma on social media? And you know, they were, you know, some of them were on Twitter going through their, you know, on their phone, some were talking through personal experience, and then the conversations would evolve from what stigma means to them, and things like trivialization. So this came up quite a bit because sometimes I'd say, well, actually, I hear things which is not really stigmatizing, but it's like trivializing an issue. And then it reminded me of this issue. I don't know if some of you might have seen this Detective Monk. It's some American drama, where Detective Monk has OCD, and they're basically popularizing in a very positive way. So saying, actually OCD is a really good thing to have, and you can make a great detective. That's the kind of the narrative, and so it's a bit different to stigma, but actually from a service user perspective, when they're reading that, what they're saying is actually from their perspective it's the same sort of thing. So they're helping me build this picture of what bothers them on social media. And then we're looking through the tweets, we're talking about their experience of using Twitter or YouTube comments and all this sort of stuff, and we're talking about kind of the features, so like what the characteristics of these comments. And they're saying, well, actually, even through conversations with friends, people often use the word, oh, that person's psycho or schizo or something, and they don't like that, whereas actually when you're talking to an academic or something, when a researcher comes to talk to the group, they say, well, actually, I've noticed when a researcher comes, they're using words like psychosis as in a professional way. So they're helping me kind of pick up features that would essentially I can then look for when I'm doing the data collection. I can create a way of saying, well, actually, okay, if there's a text that uses the word psycho or schizo, then I'm going to consider that as stigmatizing, versus if I find a comment that uses the word psychosis, then it's more likely to be not stigmatizing. So they're helping me build this picture. So that's how it starts. We start shaping the project. So then you go away. I went away. You start collecting some data, and you go back and you say, actually, okay, let's start classifying some tweets. So now that we have an idea of what stigma means, I collected some tweets, and I said to 2 independent raters. So these are service user researchers, people who have used mental health services and are expert researchers, similar to what I mentioned with the Shaw team. And I said, okay, here's a bunch of tweets. Please go ahead and apply this. Whether you think it's whether a tweet is stigmatizing or not. So this was the rating scale. 0 is neutral or not stigmatizing, and 1 was stigmatizing. And then once I got that, then I went to a third independent rater, another, again, expert by experience, and I said, actually, we've got some discrepancies here. Can you make the final judgment? What do you think? And then as a kind of another sort of safety net or understanding net, to go to a 4th expert by experience and say, okay, look, I've got these final ratings. Can you give me your opinion? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why? So all of this kind of helps me build up a picture of what is stigmatizing to service users. So I'll give you some examples here. So this was a tweet in the dataset. So psychosis can wax and wane over an hourly, daily, weekly basis, Benedict says, with this hashtag. And in the first round, the service user rater said, actually, well, that's fine. We think that's a neutral tweet. And then this tweet, had to call the police on a schizo in my building's parking garage. Service user raters thought, actually, that's a 1. We're going to say that's stigmatizing. I think it's using in a stigmatizing way. And there's a couple of more examples here. Every time I get to go to the bathroom, my co-worker stares at me and freaks out because she thinks I'm going to a secret meeting she's not invited to. Imagine being that psychotic. I thought, well, actually, and there's this other one from a Daily Mail online headline, a psychotic child killer on the streets since confession. So they're giving me this information. They're rating these tweets as neutral or stigmatizing. That's giving me a picture, and then I'm taking that to I've got their ratings here. There's tweets. I'm taking it to a third rater. I'm saying, okay, this is the kind of data set. Can you help me understand? So there's this tweet. The first person said it is stigmatizing. The second person said it's not. What do you think? Or they said it is. So essentially, when I'm creating this classification data set, it's I want it to represent the opinions of the service users, basically. So I'm kind of creating steps myself to do that, basically. And then once we had the final ratings from these 3 people, I said, actually, I'm going to take a subset of this. I'm going to give it to a 4th person. I'm going to say, this is the tweet. We thought it's a 0. Do you agree? And then this is an iterative process. I'm looking for 100% agreement. So this, keep going around. We'll discuss it a bit more, and then essentially we're building up, a picture. And then, so we do that, and then we go back to the YPAG, go back and say, okay, well, look, I've done this ratings of, created a machine learning model, and there's several ways to evaluate a model. There's all these metrics and all this other stuff you can do. What's important to you? And in a meeting, I kind of explain things like accuracy of a model. I'm not going to go into detail here, but the point here is that after this conversation of me telling them what's how do you evaluate a model, what service users preferred was actually, we're talking about, they said we like high accuracy, so the agreement between service users and the model. So if we have this confusion matrix here as an example, you've got the computer rating as a tweet as a stigmatizing and neutral, and then the service user rating as stigmatizing and neutral. So where they're the greens, and that's accuracy. So that so that's one metric they're interested in. But then, interestingly, over conversations, what they actually said was, we're also more interested in having a low false negative rate, so fewer false negatives. So this is the number of times where the model mistakenly identifies a tweet as stigmatizing. Sorry, where the computer thinks that a tweet is neutral, but actually the service user says it is. And they thought that was quite important, actually, that this computer's made a mistake. And so actually, when we're looking at the models, when I was evaluating the models, that was at the forefront of my mind, actually. So we've created 8 models, whatever mod. How are we going to evaluate this? Okay, well, let's look at the one with fewest false negatives. So and then it's okay. So we've got that now. What can we do with this? I mean, these conversations also happen at the start, so defining future directions and some of the applications of this research. So is it translational? So one thing we're looking at is, or talking about, is having like a kind of stigma index. So if we deploy this kind of model on Twitter, we can kind of measure, similar to stock prices, what's going up and down over time. We can look at how stigma is kind of going up and down over time, and particularly in relation to campaigns like time to change and stuff like that. And the other thing is to kind of use this not really the machine learning, but use this idea to basically put a sponsored ad on somebody's timeline. That's like a a campaign, time to change type of campaign, because we go online and often you get these Starbucks or sponsored ads. But actually what we can then do is look at somebody's tweets, see if they're producing stigmatizing content, and then put this ad on. So it's more targeted campaign, as Starbucks do, so using this kind of information for good, or to reduce or minimize stigma, basically. But also then to have like not essentially parental controls, but be in a position where a user can now say, okay, I want to search schizophrenia or skits, that keyword in Twitter, but I don't want to see any other negative stuff. So they should be able to go into Twitter and then click on this algorithm and say, yeah, switch it on, and then the model runs in the background and kind of hides or filters away a lot of the ones that the computer thinks is stigmatizing, that sort of content. So you can see, through this kind of process of several focus groups, we're developing a project that's kind of embedded in service user opinions all the way through, and importantly, so that any future deployment of this IP, this tool, is useful for them. I've got one more example. I'm also conscious of time, so I'm going to whiz through this, but this is a questionnaire where SLAM, so the South London Maudsley Foundation Trust, in the outpatient unit, they were collecting, they were asking patients to fill in a questionnaire about their experience of the service, and they came to us and said, look, we're doing this, we have this current questionnaire, but we want to change it because at the moment the question's not robust and it's difficult for us to compare responses with national results. There's other trusts are using the friends and family test, and we can't really gauge where we sit. But what's good that they wanted to develop and review these questions so that they're appropriate and reliable. So they wanted to involve service users and carers. So we thought, great, okay. So this was the existing survey. This is what they sent to me, and they said, okay, look, let's ask service users for their opinion. So I went to the YPAG. I said, look, folks. Well, actually, first thing I did was with SLAM, we made a plan. We said, okay, so senior management have identified there's an issue. Let's do some development with service users. Let's take that knowledge back to the senior management team, and then they can develop some questions and get the ball rolling. Send it back to us, and then we'll talk to the service users again, and then we'll start piloting. So it's up to you as a researcher, up to us as researchers, how we kind of put the plan together. So again, there's no right or wrong. It's kind of how do you see what's the vision for involvement. And so I took this to our YPAG, and the first thing was straight away they looked at it and said, actually, you know what, we could word how the introduction is written here. And so one of the comment was, people may view the questionnaire more positively and be more willing to complete if it includes a disclaimer at the beginning that it's been co-developed, and the point of the survey is to improve the aims of the service, and various other things. I'm sure you have the recording, so you can read the comments at the slides later. So you can see the questionnaire survey were developed. So this is what we added in, in red. We added that into this is the pilot version. This is the original questionnaire. These are some of the questions, and the service user said, do you feel involved in your care could be seen as vague? People may attend the services without necessarily feeling involved. This question could be split into, do you feel involved in decisions in your care, and do you feel informed about decisions in your care? So what the service is saying is, actually, we don't mind having a slightly longer questionnaire, but as long as it's it's making sense, and they can answer the questions. Here, are staff kind and caring? Questions regarding staff attitudes should bear in mind that staff involved in a person's care can change frequently, and that outpatients may have contact with a limited number of staff. So it wasn't clear, and also it wasn't clear why there's an NA option. It's always going to feel applicable. You'll always can answer that question. So you can see how kind of the YPAG are given this information going back to the senior management team and to the patient experience team within SLAM. They're taking on board, they're redefining it. So after all this kind of feedback, we go back to the service users, we go back to the senior management. It's an iterative process. You hold focus groups, you talk to them, and then you're piloting something that's actually meaningful. So having said all of that, there are PPI is not just a walk in the park. It's it's challenging, as any part of research is challenging. When you're designing study or stats or whatever it is, there's various challenges, and these are just some of them. For example, stigma. A user can be dismissed as biased. If you're involving somebody who's service user and they're saying, oh, we should do X, Y, and Z, are they over involved and biased because obviously that's in their interest? It's always going to be the case. And then there's this issue of kind of involvement versus tokenism. Are you, which I spoke about earlier on, are you just doing it because you have to, because the funders have asked for it, or because it looks good? We have to ensure that involvement is, we're involving for involvement purposes, to make the research better, not just so it's tokenistic. And then alongside that, we need to be mindful of, is what we're doing, are we being representative? So one thing that I came to mind recently was in SLAM we have a program called Consent for Contact, where we can recruit service users, but before we contact the service users themselves, we have to email their care coordinators. And then essentially, it got me thinking, actually, that means the care coordinators are the gatekeepers. So we're at the discretion of the care coordinators as to who is essentially involved or gets the call to be in the study. How representative is that? So I'm just pointing out things to be mindful of. I'm not saying there's no solution or I've got a solution. I'm just saying this is stuff that when you're involving, stuff to be mindful of, thinking about accessibility. So I spoke about how the YPAG meeting is on a Saturday in central London because we've got people coming from all over London, all over the UK. Actually, some members come from Birmingham, Nottingham, and so it's easy for them to come to Euston than it is to come to the RIOT PPN. And especially during COVID, all of our advice groups have moved online. So how do you facilitate that for people who don't have internet or who can't take part? So stuff to be mindful of, and especially things like double identity. So a researcher may see you as a service user, and a service user may see you as a researcher. So where do you draw the line? Therefore, are there blurred boundaries? And these blurred boundaries may be difficult to manage when you're trying to reduce power differentials, especially if you're there as a researcher, but you want to involve service users, and you have a group of service users in a steering group with a big professor, basically. How do you kind of say, actually, prof, we, our service users think X, Y, and Z. I think we should incorporate that. There's going to be these blurred boundaries and power differentials. So it's stuff to be mindful of, basically. In terms of barriers, sometimes it's just people are worried they don't know how to do it. It's fear of the unknown, so people avoid it. Sometimes it's laziness, or just forget. We don't realise that it's something that we need to do. That kind of ignorance that comes along with it. People, you might forget because it's it's not something that we're taught as a BSc psychology student. It's not part of the research and design module, so it's not at the forefront of our minds, and you may be kind of put off by the jargon, or you might not know what terminology to use, or how to kind of communicate your idea with people. And there are several issues. Well, not these are small issues, but some people might not want to be paid via bank transfer, because it might affect any kind of universal credit that they're getting, and then it's kind of arranging that with your finance department and this sort of stuff is stuff to be mindful of. So it's not necessarily a barrier, but I put it there just so because it can be, and it's stuff to be mindful of. So I'll stop there, and I will stop sharing my screen, Livia, if that's okay. And should we? I don't know if there's any questions or.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Sagar. I think it's very, sorry, I just get a little bit of feedback.
Sorry, let me mute my mic.
Yeah, it's just always difficult to think if you hear yourself speak. So yeah, I think it's such a refreshing perspective, and it's a way to really make research open, and we shouldn't just make it open to other researchers, we should make it open to the people who are involved in it. So I guess I'm just going to open up with one question from me, actually, because I was really curious. In your time in this role, so you've been doing this kind of work for a while, do you see the landscape changing? Do you see PPI being kind of becoming more and more common in research?
Yes and no. Yes, because people are becoming more aware of PPI, and I think that's partly driven by funders, and the more we engage kind of also our sort of theme leads, seniors, our profs, department heads, then that kind of trickles down to RA level postdocs, PhD students, that we should be doing this. So yes, we've done in our BRC team, we've done a lot of work to make that happen, to support that. Sometimes I find that it's not that people don't care about it. It's they don't know what's around, or that they have to, or like it's something to do. So, for example, I may engage with a postdoc in neuroimaging department, for example, spend lots of time with that postdoc, explaining PPI, really helping them shape the project, and then that will trickle down to the RAs. But then once that person leaves and gets a new job somewhere, that knowledge is then gone with them, and then it's kind of, you have to kind of redo that. So the landscape is, it's I know at BRC it's been good. It's always been high on the agenda, and that's because people like Till Whites and Diana Rose and people have done a lot of kind of work to it. But I feel like we need a system where it's kind of knowledge isn't gone with somebody, if that makes sense. Like it's a thing that happens within your research groups. So it's not that there's Sagar and his group are there, we'll just get PPI from there. But then what if we're not there? Does that mean PPI is gone, it's finished? People, researchers won't do it. So I feel like we need to have researchers doing it themselves in a way. Your research groups or should be kind of doing it in the same way as you would any other part of your research study. So it is slowly changing, but the danger is as I said, people moving on, leaving, and then that knowledge goes. So we need to find a way to kind of embed that within teams, basically.
Okay, great, thank you. That's really good to hear. So you've got some questions coming through, so I'm just going to read out this one from Anonymous. So they're saying one issue of PPI I have heard is that a select few speak for others. In neurodiverse samples such as ASD, you have those with significant language and comprehension difficulties, but others have no such impairment and therefore have, quote unquote, the most to say. is this common? Is this a common problem? How would you deal with this if it is a common problem?
Great question. Not just in neurodiverse samples, just I mean, if we take a step back, just generally, like one thing I noticed when I started in this role is I would some of these, so for example, some of these groups were already set up when I started. So the young persons group was set up, the SUAG was set up. So I went, introduced myself, and then I would go to an MQ meeting, in Central London, and I'd see half the people that are in the YPAG there. I'm like, oh, I know you already, And then I go to another meeting, a PIN meeting, and people from the SUAG are already there, and then we're trying to recruit, and we're getting the same participant pool. So sometimes looking back at papers and thinking, okay, if I look at the demographics table from a paper from 2016 and a paper from 2017 or something, it's the same pool of people because they're being recruited from the same way. And then not just neurodiversity. If we just take like ethnicity, when I started in the YPAG, I think there were like 15 people in the group, of which sort of 10 were young white girls, and like 3 or 4 guys. I think there were like 13, 14 people, like 1 or 2 men basically. And no, and like one of them was BAME, one of them was an Asian person. And I was like, well, actually, this is not representative. Never mind in terms of neurodiverse, but just in terms of in terms of opinion. So there's several problems that I saw when I walked into it, which was demographic-wise, but then also like the views. We've got the same people advising at the YPAG, at McPain, blah blah blah. And so we in our BRC made a very conscious effort to kind of reach out to the community. So we used this. SLAM have a involvement register, so looking at people who have never done anything like this, never done any research. We use C4C, explore the C4C data to find people who have never they've said yes to taking part in research, but have never actually taken part in research. So these are kind of people are interested, but it's never had the opportunity. Let's call them up, ask them, and we gave them lots of training, and helped them kind of settle in. And so now if you look at our Fasta group, our YPAG, it's very diverse. It's a completely, if you look at our demographics table from in a paper that we're going to do in 2020, for example, it's very different to 2017, a lot more diverse. But this point about neurodiverse, that's another thing that's come up now. So something that's we've been talking about is that, what is the makeup of our YPAG in terms of clinical history? So I agree with that. I think there's more work that needs to be done, and we need to kind of now factor that in, and I think it's happening at various stages. First we focus on demographics, and we're focusing on kind of who are the actual people, and now we need to think about neurodiversity, because only then will we be able to reduce things like jargon, make things accessible, because somebody with, I don't know, psychosis versus autism or something else, they'll be able to explain their language in a way that they want it to be explained, basically, that suits them, whereas somebody else might not. So yeah, this is something that we're working on. Is it a common problem? I can't speak for a variety of groups, but I've noticed it, and we're talking about it within our BRC in our groups. So I would say it's a problem for me, and in our BRC, I would say that. And how would you deal with it? I would deal with it in the same way as I have with the diversity issue and the actual people issue. So there's ways. So when I'm looking at when I'm looking at the C4C register for people to find who are interested in research, you can pull out, you can interrogate the database by looking at various columns like demographics, age, and ethnicity, blah blah. But also like what services are they being seen in, and then we can ensure that we're recruiting people or asking people to be involved who are not coming from one service, basically. We're asking people from a variety of services. So that's what I would do.
That's amazing, thank you. And I guess a lot of it is just making the whole process easier for people. And I guess here comes in a question from Wendy, who's asking, I agree with the point of it being tricky to find a convenient way of paying participants. And she's interested to hear your views on the use of vouchers.
Oh man, it's very subjective. So I mean, we in our team, in our BRC, we spent a lot of time talking to finance, and until Wipes has spent a lot of time talking to finance about how we pay service users, and that was work that we've done in our BRC. And just before this, I was in a PPI network meeting across all the BRCs, and this thing came up. Some service users, some patients prefer vouchers because, as I said, it doesn't affect their universal credit, or it doesn't, and they just prefer that. So you can. It's essentially a conversation that each kind of group, team, whatever research lab, whatever needs to have with their business coordinator, business administrator, or that the next person, whoever deals with the actual processing of the form, the expenses form, have that conversation. Say, look, some of our people want this, some of our expert by experience want that. Vouchers, money, in other forms. How can we pay that? We have the budget for it. What's the best way to do it? I'm afraid I can't comment too much because it's kind of so individual, and we're paid, so we pay for like the SUAG, we were paying cash because that's how the SUAG wanted it, and then our business administrator would do the hard work of whatever she had to do. I don't know, I never really got involved in that, but we just gave her the invoice and say we paid this person £20 plus X for travel in cash. And here's the leftover change, and it was her job to make sure I had the cash before the meeting. The YPAG don't want that. The YPAG wanted BACS transfers. Sometimes in Fasta, some people will want vouchers, and it's up to us to kind of facilitate that. So very individual. It's I'm afraid, Wendy, I can't kind of comment on a generalized view, but we just have to work with services and work with our finance teams, basically.
Great, thank you. And I guess as we're on the subject of money, there is a question asking about whether the BRC provides kind of free access to those services, or would the researcher have to pay to get the BRC input?
All free, or fully funded from the BRC, fully funded from our theme. We would love for you to come in and talk to us, about your research. I'm just moving because my battery's flashing, so I need to plug my charger in. Yeah, we would love for you to come and talk to us about your work. So I don't know, Olivia, do you share the slides or anything like that afterwards?
Yes, we can definitely do that.
Yeah, so my email address is at the end of it. So drop me a line outlining what stage of the study you're at, what you're thinking, and then it's up to us to kind of help you shape your PPI plan. Basically, you might say, oh, I've just had an idea, very, very early days, and then that's up to me to then say, actually, well, okay, how does this sound? How does that sound? What would you like? That kind of thing. But it's completely free to you. It's a free service as other things on the BRC, like the biostats department have 30-minute what you call them, like question. You can ask them questions in 30-minute time slots. Similar to that, it's all free to you. We'll fund the meetings and stuff like that.
Okay, that's great news. I guess a follow-up question on that would be: is it open to anyone, or would you have to be based at King's to use those services?
It's open to anyone. We prioritize BRC researchers, then King's, people at the IOPP, and then King's, and then others. So, but it's not been the case where, so if I give a concrete example in the YPAG, if I'm thinking about, let's say, let me take 2020, of all of our slots, maybe 70% were taken up by KCL / our BRC researchers, and then 30% was made up from like UCL or Imperial or an industry body, a pharmaceutical company. So priority is always given to our BRC researchers, but if there's a slot already taken, then that's fine. It's already taken from the guy from Imperial, and then that's fine. So yeah, anybody is welcome to use it.
Great, thank you. We had a reply from Wendy saying, "Thank you, your experience is much mine and makes me feel I'm not going far wrong."
Yeah. Great.
We have another question about sample sizes. So Anonymous is saying, we hear a lot of concerns regarding sample sizes in research studies with the focus on recruiting a sample large enough to take a statistically significant effect. This effect might not be clinically meaningful. How might PPI inform sample size? And then they're saying, sorry for the very specific question.
That's okay. It's I mean, my first response was actually I don't know, but let me have a quick. So when we're talking about sample size, you're talking about, it's like doing a power analysis. Now, that's not something that a group of service users would advise you. What you would say to them is, this is my idea. This is what I want to do. I'm thinking of, recruiting some people to carry out this intervention I'm running. They absolutely wouldn't, consult about how many people you need or would have any idea about that. But they would do is kind of give you ideas about where to recruit from, what to say when you're recruiting, how to recruit, not necessarily the number. So I don't think that's a question you take to the group, to a advisory group and say, how do you calculate? And what you could say is, what you could do is, you've spoken to a statistician. The statistician said, an N of 60, for example. And then you take that to a service user group and say, look, I've spoken to a statistician for me to detect an effect people that have X, Y, and Z. This is my, inclusion criteria, and have a conversation with them about that. And they might say, look, we think that's not enough. We might think that's a lot. I think them, and they'll tell you, like, I think people might be put off by X, Y, and Z about your research studies. And then, then that's a different kind of question. But I don't think there's a conversation to be had with them about detecting statistical significance, I'm afraid. It's more about how they can help you reach your number.
Yeah. So I guess from my experience, I can definitely say consulting service users in terms of recruitment and the ways of approaching patients and participants, that have been incredibly helpful and definitely something I could recommend. We have a question about running remote PPI events. So Anonymous is saying, could you offer a little guidance about remote PPI events, particularly as part of preliminary PPI, when you are wanting to start to have a dialogue with interesting service users, particularly in terms of setting up meetings in the first place and balancing access with things like ensuring that support is available to people, ensuring privacy, etc. I have wondered about having some sort of a booking system.
Yeah, good question. So we've moved all of our advisory groups online, and only through kind of experience have I figured out what the best kind of way is. So for example, if we have a meeting on Teams, I wouldn't set up a calendar invite and then put the person's email address and send them, like a calendar invite. I would send them the join link. So, and why is that? Because the people can join anonymously. So things like this I figured out over through experience. So they can just join as guest kind of thing, whereas otherwise the whole email address will show. So that sort of ensures privacy. But the thing about working remotely, it's been a bit weird because you've got people who probably the same as anything else. You've got people who are absolutely loving it. They much prefer it. They feel they can contribute a lot more. They're not shy to contribute. And there's people that have said to me, Sagar, look, while you're doing it online, I'm going to take a back seat. So they've dropped out. They're taking like a sabbatical from advisory groups. So we've had 3 young people. We've got 18 on the register. 3 young people have said, I don't want to take part in virtual stuff. So when we go back in person, let me know. So it's again, it's very individual, and you just have to work with people. So that's one issue. Second one is about ensuring accessibility. So some people have never used Teams, never used Zoom and this sort of stuff. So as a theme, we put loads of guides together, how-to guides. This was at the start, but like as we were going into lockdown 1 last year, how to download it, how to log, how to make an account, what to click, what to press, like with like a PDF with arrows that saying click here. And we sent this out to people, followed up with a phone call. And in that email we said, if you're still confused or what you're doing, if you want us to give you a call, let us know. And then a couple said, oh, can you call me? So then we'd call them and they would describe what's on the screen. and stuff like that. So, you know, it took a little bit more time to get things set up, but now once it's set up, it's all great. You know, we're kind of running through them just fine. What's another issue? Another issue to bear in mind is to leave, is to keep like 15 minutes before the meeting starts. So like if our meeting's starting at 12, we would in our email to participants, we would say, I'll be online from 11:45 or 11:50. You know, if anybody has any issues, this is my number, call me in that time. And so that means that way we can help you get set up for 12, you know, so you're not faffing about, you're not worried, not stressed out when it comes to our people won't have the same level of expertise as we do, because we're doing this every day, right? We're on Teams all the time now. In terms of, I've wondered about having some sort of booking system. I'm not sure what you mean by that. When we don't have like a booking system, because ours is like our meetings are decided at the meeting. We say, okay, the next meeting will be on this day, and then we create kind of a calendar, like a placeholder for people. So I'm not sure what you mean by booking system, I'm afraid. I don't know if you want to follow up with, I don't know if you know, Olivia.
I'm not sure, so I guess we'll leave it open. If the person wants to send over another message, they can clarify. We've got a question just asking, I guess very generic, what do you think are the strengths and limitations of your research? And they're also saying excellent presentation, thank you. So I guess what they're saying is like, what would you say is the biggest strength of actually involving patients and the public in your research?
I think for me, it's definitely been about understanding what bothers people. So like I would take it, and by the way, you know, this machine learning and social media research, I've now set up several other projects about similar stuff in like dementia misconceptions and then addiction research. And the thing I find is I'm listening to service users and I'm thinking, okay, that's really interesting, because I wouldn't have classed that as stigmatizing, or I wouldn't have thought of that as a misconception. So for me, it's understanding like what's in their head, what are they seeing that I'm not, basically. So I think that's a huge strength. I mean, limitations. I mean, probably, you know, I'm still not fully happy with the diversity of views fundamentally. So, you know, I did this project in psychosis, and it was a collaboration with the Young Persons Advisory Group. Okay, but not all of them have experienced psychosis, not all of them have taken antipsychotic medication. You know, so they're giving the experience as service users. So it's a question of where you draw the line, like how detailed do you want to be, you know? So technically speaking, that's a limitation itself. How big a limitation, you know, we can't say, because we haven't done the same thing. We haven't done the same thing as you know, asking people with experience of psychosis to curate the tweets. But there's always that sort of limitation. But certainly for me, the strength has been understanding from their perspective, and that gives me the confidence, because I know that when I'm publishing, or when I want to do more research, I can say, actually, this is not something that's come from my head and it's only I'm doing. You know, this is important to service users as well, and me being able to say that gives me kind of more confidence in my work, basically.
Great, thank you. We had a couple of comments come through. So we have from Charlotte, not a question, just thanks for the interesting and informative talk. And then we have a clarification about the booking system. So the person's saying they just mean a way of keeping track of who is attending the events. Oh
yeah, we have a really high-tech system for that called an Excel sheet. We just, I'm not just joking, obviously. We just have an Excel spreadsheet that's password protected, that's just shared between us in our group. And we just record, you know, it's on the minutes who's attended and who sent apologies, and then we just transfer some of that information into our spreadsheet. Yeah. Okay, and so we're running close to the hour, so we'll do one more question. So let me just read this one out. These initiatives are brilliant. They do sound like researchers need quite a lot of forethought and organization in order to introduce PPI in time. Sometimes researchers might want a quick tip from someone who has lived experience when the project is already underway and ethics have already been approved. Do you have any advice for this? Yeah, I would. There's so many different ways. Yeah, I mean, so the Fasta Service is a fantastic quick fire service. You know, you send us your document. I mean, I see what you're saying, because if you've already got ethics, then you know, if the Fasta might say there's a bit of jargon there, do you want to send an amendment? So that might not be fully right, but Fasta Service in principle is a way to get fast feedback from carers and service users about your, you know, study in general, especially about written documents. But we have several meeting slots, like in the YPAG, the SUAG, Malady group, all its advisory groups, and it doesn't matter what stage you're at. It's, you know, you could just attend. You know, it's like they're normally 45-minute slots. You know, whenever the next available slot, you just go in, have a cup of tea with the service users and a biscuit around a table, have a chat with them, and, you know, the only the next slot is available. And that's something that we in the BRC have been talking about, because lots of our slots get filled up, and so sometimes the researchers wait until October. So we're talking about increasing the number of slots we have, but also nowadays we're putting on special meetings for people. So, you know, for example, in this person's case, if they wanted to talk to somebody, email us, and then I'd have a chat with them and say, okay, how about we organise a small focus group with service users next week, for example. So, you know, things can be done on a bespoke basis as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's wrap up here. Thank you again, Sagar, for this very inspiring and very informative presentation. I hope we all walk away from here with more interest in involving patients and service users in our research. I know I definitely will. So yeah, thank you a lot for that. And to everyone else, we'll see you again next week for a talk from Dr. Jill Jacobson on evaluating replication. What does failure to replicate mean to the original study? And that will be run by our Durham site. So thank you a lot, everyone.